Hi, second period. My name's Yash. Welcome to Huckleberry Finn presentation.
Hi, it's Eden.
Hi, I'm Lauren.
Ethan.
Hi, I'm Malik.
We've risked our life to bring you this. We have. This is at the beginning of the book, the very first thing you see. So, in order to bring you this information that I know you've all been on the edge of your seats about, like, what's the theme of Huck Finn? We have been followed relentlessly by snipers and lots of crazy things has happened, but it's all for you guys, so.
Author's information. Samuel Longhorn Clemens was born in Missouri along the banks of the Mississippi River, which would later become an important aspect of his classic work, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Both his father and his uncle owned slaves in Missouri. He would often spend time as a child going between both plantations. As a result, Clemens spent much of his childhood playing around slaves' quarters, giving him an invaluable chance to learn, listen, and observe. This exposure from experiences from slaves' manners is shown in most of his important books. As a young boy, Twain was sickly and was cared for by his mother, and often told made-up stories for her ill son. Her love for storytelling later became the inspiration for her son to write. Samuel Clemens soon dropped out of school to become a printer's apprentice, in which he contributed stories to the newspaper. Here he became inspired to write his famous titles Life on the Mississippi and Roughing It. In 1876, Twain published The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, calling it a time to his childhood. Despite many critics, the book sold well, causing him to produce The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. His early childhood experiences of growing along the banks of Mississippi and observing the manners of those surrounding him, Mark Twain's The Adventure of Huckleberry Finn became a success. As for the style of the book, it is not less than definitive in American literature. The prose of Huckleberry Finn established for written prose the virtues of American colloquial speech. Due to his introduction and influence of colloquial writing, it is often seen in today's literature. Mark Twain soon died on April 21st, 1910.
This is Huck Finn. He's already had an adventure in which he and his best friend, Tom Sawyer, stole a treasure chest full of gold from a band of robbers. From the money, he gets a whole dollar a day of interest. Huck was adopted by Widow Douglas and her sister, Miss Watson, and they try to get Huck to be more civilized and not live like a homeless child. However, Huck still has lots of fun and engages in activities such as talking to a magic hairball owned by Jim, Miss Watson's superstitious slave. Huck fears that his pap will come and try to take the money, so he gives it all to Judge Thatcher, who is in charge of it. On the way back, he runs into Pap, who tries to take his money but can't because it belongs to Judge Thatcher. Pap tries to get the money from Judge Thatcher, but Judge Thatcher refuses. So, Pap does the logical thing, kidnapping Huck and taking him to a log cabin in the middle of the woods. Widow Douglas and Judge Thatcher try to free Huck, but they are unsuccessful. Huck escapes on his own by faking his own death and taking a canoe to Jackson Island, where he finds Jim, who used the confusion caused by Huck's apparent death to escape himself. A storm hits the island, flooding the river. Once the water goes down, they find a house filled with various articles of clothing, supplies, and a mysterious dead body in a shadowy corner. Using the clothes, Huck disguises himself as a girl and travels to a nearby town, where he learns that a search party looking for Jim is headed to the island they are hiding on. Huck hurries back and the two leave the island via boat. Their plan is to float down the Mississippi until they reach the Ohio River, and then sail up the Ohio River to the Free States where Jim will be free. Unfortunately, they get separated in a thick fog that causes them to lose the turn. Fortunately, they find each other afterwards. Suddenly, their raft is hit by a steamboat. Huck washes up on the shore and ends up caught in a feud between two families, the Capulets and the Montagues. The Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons. Huck stays with the Grangerfords for a few days, but soon one of the Grangerford daughters elopes with the Shepherdson's son, and a violent gunfight erupts. Huck escapes from this and finds Jim with a repaired raft. The two set off again, and a few days later they meet two con artists, one who claims to be an English duke and the other the rightful king of France. They decide to join Huck and Jim, who can't do anything about it because they are a child and an escaped slave. The group continues down the river, with the Duke and King stopping at towns to scam people out of their money. In one town, they put on a play called The Royal Nonsuch, which consists of, I kid you not, the king running around naked, painted rainbow colors, pretending to be a wild animal. In another town, they pretend to be two brothers coming to collect the inheritance of Peter Wilkes, a third brother, who recently died. Huck decides to thwart the plan and hides the gold inside Peter Wilkes' coffin, and then tells one of the sisters, Mary Jane, about the plot. Suddenly, the real brothers return, and the Duke and King barely make it back to the raft in the confusion, just as Huck and Jim are leaving themselves. They continue down the river and continue to scam towns along the way. Finally, the Duke and King sell Jim to a farmer. Huck goes to find him and discovers he was sold to Silas and Sally Phelps, who are Tom Sawyer's aunt and uncle. They mistake Huck for Tom, who is supposed to be coming for a visit, so Huck pretends to be Tom. He finds Tom before he arrives at the house, and Tom pretends to be his younger brother Sid. Tom makes a ridiculously complicated plan to help free Jim, which works, but in the process, Tom is shot in the leg. Jim sacrifices his freedom to get Tom help. The next day, Tom reveals that Miss Watson died a few months ago and freed Jim in her will, making the entire escape completely unnecessary. Aunt Polly, Tom's guardian, arrives and reveals Huck and Tom's true identities. Huck fears that one day he will be discovered by his pap, but Jim reveals that the dead body in the house they found on the island was actually his pap. Aunt Sally then offers to adopt Huck, but he refuses, wanting more adventure and plans to head out west. So, to review the main characters. Huck Finn, very adventurous, goes on lots of adventures and loves to explore things. Then there's Jim, who's an escaped slave, so he's always afraid he's going to get caught, but he's also very superstitious and is coming up with like folk sayings and predicting the weather and stuff like that. Then there is the Duke and King, and they are very clever and they come up with lots of plans to scam people out of their money, but when it comes down to it, they really aren't very smart about anything other than getting money. Then there's Miss Watson, who is very not mean to Huck, but she tries to civilize him and make him, a normal functioning member of society. There's Widow Douglas, who adopted Huck and is similar to Miss Watson, but less overbearing. Then there is Pap, who is Huck's abusive alcoholic father, who beats him and gets drunk and wrecks the whole town. Finally, there's Judge Thatcher, who is the caretaker of the money, and the Phelps, who are Tom's aunt and uncle, and very nice.
The cap thesis. So, in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, comedic author Mark Twain exploits both his radical sense of humor and his mastery use of dialect to consciously define racist, inattentive, and prejudiced audience about the flaws within society and the defects that are easily exposed by an uneducated yet clever Huck Finn, to which the audience has severely become blind to. Basically, in this cap thesis, we note that Mark Twain uses all of his points of data spot in order to create his audience, or in order to make his audience well aware about the social flaws. Okay, details. So for details, Mark Twain, he uses a lot of detail in his book, especially when he's trying to describe characters, describe objects, describe buildings. So a foundation for any book, details are a focus Twain maintains in the book. To display his mastery of literature, he fluctuates between providing excessive details at times and to provide no details at others, or at the other. Twain successfully establishes his mastery of literature, further succeeding into providing the audience with a true definition upon their flaws through his descriptive details. So it's just basically showing just saying that Mark Twain, he uses this idea that these are facts the writer will use to convey judgment for a character. So heading on into the first quote. So in this quote, this describes King, and in this quote, It says one of these fellows was about 70 or upwards and had a bald head and very gray whiskers. He had an old battered up slouch hat on and a greasy blue woolen shirt and a ragged old blue jeans, breeches stuffed into his boot tops and home knit caluses. And both of them had big, fat, ratty looking carpet bags. So basically, in this quote, the description Huck gives, in this quote, description Huck gives the audience in-depth classification of grimy characters that Huck witnesses and endures. Utilizing a young adolescence like Huck, Twain is able to hide his true judgment of the audience, exposing their own prejudice behind a fictional character who commits the same act. So basically, in this quote, using words like ragged old blue jeans and using words like stuffed into his booty tops or stuffed into his boot tops, using words like those, he uses his own description and he applies to the social flaw of just having the social flaw of poorness, and connecting with that flaw is very important in this book, mainly because he wants to convey how the audience how Huck is able to manipulate thoughts into ideas, which is the way we feel for this character, and it's not well kept up, which the audience may see in the character as well. So it just shows the true definition, outlining a person and connecting back to the thesis. It exploits the prejudice in audience and the flaws that are present in the society that Mark Twain is in. So the second quote, it's also description about Pap. This is description about Pap. Pap, he's very okay. So it reads, he was most 50 and he looked it. His hair was long and tangled and greasy. It was all black, no gray. So was his long mixed up whiskers. There weren't no color on his face or in his face. It was white. Not like another man's white, but a white to make a body sick, a white to make a body's flesh crawl, a treat-toed white, a fish belly white, his clothes just rags, the boot on that foot was busted, and 2 of his toes stuck through. So this quote basically describes his father as a disguise. Twain plots out a judgment that highlights the prejudice of the audience. So again, with that poor society that Twain is in, you can see that many people in the that might be present in the audience might look like this or might have this physical appearance. And what Twain's doing here is really very attentive to detail, using words like fish belly or body's flesh crawl. These negative words add on to this description of the character and conveys judgment. And with the thesis in mind, you can see that, of course, the prejudice in humans that is taken place, the ability to think that, oh, I'm going to judge, this character just because I want to. He wanted to add in that type of point of view, and he wanted to make sure that the flaw of, being attentive and being prejudiced, it's very important that Twain exposes this to his audience to make the physical characterization more of a connection to the audience. Okay, so allusion. Allusion is basically a reference to other books and other book characters already familiar to the audience, using them to make a point, which allows them to help convince the audience further to what the story arc is conveying. So with Twain's cunning mastery, Twain is easily able to incorporate other book characters that are already familiar to the audience, using them to propel the plot to newer heights and thus exposing the true nature of society. The first quote. So this quote, it's found in the very beginning of the book. It reads out, you don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mark Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth mainly. Twain gives the audience a character whom they're already familiar with, Huck, and being that he is already beloved in the mind of audience, leaves room for little to no criticism for him, seeing as it is coming from a friend. So this provides Twain with the opportunity to go all out in criticism for the audience. So the audience is already familiar with Huck Finn from the previous book, and he's already beloved in the mind of the audience. This means that the criticism through Huck Finn will be more readily accepted by the audience, seeing as it is coming from a friend. In the second quote, this is the speech. In the second quote, it reads aloud that this is the speech, I learned it easy enough while he was learning to the king to be or not to be. That is the bare bodkin. So basically here, the king is on a raft and he's trying to recite a specific verse or soliloquy from Hamlet, which is William Shakespeare play. And then after that, after the whole entire soliloquy, well, the old man, he liked that speech and he might soon got it so he could do it first rate. This soliloquy is very important in the book, mainly because Twain, he might have chosen this twist itself to personify one of his characters as uneducated. In the quote, you can see that what does it say? Yeah, to be or not to be, that is a bare bodkin. That's not the correct quote. The correct quote is to be or not to be. That is the question. So Twain does this specifically to identify an audience that is uneducated. It's just social flaw out there that there is a population that does not, there's a population out there that is uneducated and it is not perfectly, able to communicate to anyone they know. So it helps the audience understand the context of the situation that King is trying to practice for his lines, for his shows, quote unquote, which, it doesn't go well because he's uneducated. So Twain could be marking this, hey, because you're not educated, it's gonna affect you and it's not gonna be good for you, mainly because of this character, King. He ends up being, he gets feathered, he gets, abused by a lot of people because he's not, good at what he does. He's not educated enough. So it's very important that Twain did this in order to connect to his audience. And then in the end, it just adds into the it just adds in that, okay, well, Huck is the main character, right? He seems to be getting his way out of it only because, he's smart about it. So let me be smart. So yeah.
Diction refers to the author's choices of words and the order of the words. These words serve multiple purposes given their presence and arrangement. Words are a writer's primary tool. They create the color and texture of the written work. So Twain's word choices symbolize as crucial to all aspects of the novel, especially in establishing the character of Huck and an essential piece of this puzzle. Utilizing the character of Huck, Twain easily implies informal word choices coming from the mind of a Southern adolescent, and rather than expose the flaws of society directly, a goal of his, is able to impose humor through his new word choice. So one of the quotes, "Deed you ain't. You never said no truer thing than that, you bet you. And once he said, hear him beg, and wit we hadn't got the best of him and tied him, he'd kill us both just for nothing." So this quote was about two robbers that were on a ship, and Twain makes sure to use incorrect English throughout his book to create grammatical errors specifically for the reader to be able to understand how the characters acted and sounded. The book would not have had the same feel if Twain did not add this small but impactful detail. We can see the type of person the speaker is and even how well educated they are. His goal was to make these characters sound as real as possible and utilize the different dialects found in this time period. The next quote is, "Directly, I could just barely hear meow, meow down here. That was good, says I, meow, meow." So this quote is about Huck, and he is mimicking a cat. And Twain's word choice here is subtle yet powerful. It uncovers how the characters think and feel and reveal much more than just surface level. It reveals many different dialects in the novel and much predominantly a Southern one. The diction is childlike, almost making the book lighthearted, even though it has a serious undertone and purpose to reveal the flaws in society. Imagery. Noticeably hidden throughout the novel, Twain's use of imagery adds upon the joyous tone and unique detail in the novel, all of which easily highlights the mastery of literature Twain has developed. Used vastly in intense moments of the novel, the imagery Twain provides gives ease to the reader, while also building up intense moments of Huck's adventure at times. Utilizing imagery in many significant ways, Twain is easily able to subdue the reader, providing the reader with a moment of realization into the flaws of their society. Of course, Twain also brings up humor with imagery, concluding both techniques to provide the reader with a true purpose. So the first quote is, "It was my watch, below 12, but I wouldn't. I turned in anyway if I had a bed, because a body doesn't see such a storm as that every day in the week, not by a long sight. My, how the wind did scream along, and every second or two there'd come a glare that lit up the white caps for a while, for a half a mile around, and you see the islands looking dusty through the rain, and the trees thrashing around in the wind. Then comes a whack, a bum, bum, bumble, bum, 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 and the thunder would go rumbling and grumbling away, and quit, and then rip comes another flash and another socket deleger. The waves most washed me off the raft sometimes." So, in this quote, Huck is describing a thunderstorm and how the storm would come and go and thrash him about. So, this remarkable description of the storm places the audience into the same setting, with all of the violence and motion that happens in this quote, as well as onomatopoeias in using to describe the quote or describe the sound. Twain strategically uses this only to make the audience connect to nature. At the time, many were driven to urbanization and modernization of society, and because of that, this quote informs the audience about the nature they are missing and what that is causing. Because this socialization is rapidly changing, Twain uses it to mark the flaw in society to that the society he lives in is no longer seen as survival and adaptive anymore to the environment. The next quote is, "Then the nice breeze springs up and comes fanning you from over there, so cool and fresh and sweet to smell on account of the woods and the flowers, but sometimes not that way, because they've left dead fish laying around, gars and such, and they do get pretty rank. And next you've got the full day, and everything smiling in the sun, and the songbirds just going to it." Again, Mark's colorful description of the setting that takes place for Huck seems to tell the remarkableness and beauty that society is missing out on. Using words like nice breeze and cool and fresh and sweet smell clearly indicates that Twain is trying to persuade both modern humans and people who will read the book in the near future that connection to nature and environment is something wonderful and cannot be ignored. The imagery that he uses evokes the reader's senses sight, smell, hearing, and exposes the uninformed audience about nature's true beauty.
All right, moving on to syntax. Twain's use of syntax highlights his true mastery of literature. As while writing this book, Twain was basically experimenting on, how he should write this book, and he decided to go in an informal manner and use a Southern style of speech, which is really evident through the novel. Twain pioneers a new base for future modern American literature in this novel, and while also implying the humorous aspect he desires, he's able to use this informal Southern style of speech to display the flaws of society in a, I guess, hidden or subtle manner. And moving on to the first quote, it says, "The old man made me go to the boat and get the things he had bought." Twain is trying to describe the flaw of speaking properly in his society, to which literate and prejudiced people who have read the book are often exposed to in their own society as well in their time. So, in other words, Twain's trying to expose that the prejudice on illiterate people is something that probably happens in their own society, and he wants to bring that flaw. Moving on to the second quote, it says, "Duh, now Huck, what I tell you? What I tell you up duh on Jackson Island? I told you I got a hairy breast, and what's the sign on it? And I told you I been rich once, and wanted to be rich again." Vastly in the novel, Twain makes it so that when the readers are speaking, their sentences don't really have a clear structure, leaving the reader to try to determine what the meaning is. And by doing this, Twain implies humor because it makes the characters seem pretty crazy, because usually they don't make sense, like above when Jim is talking to Huck. Uh, in addition to that, using the humor that he, I guess, using the humor from Jim's speech and any other person's speech, he creates room for himself to expose true flaws, like the flaw of literacy in their society, behind his humor, which people probably don't pick up. Right, moving on to point of view. Uh, Twain portrays the novel from the perspective of Huck, who is a young and innocent person to the world. Using Huck's rookie-like personality, which means that he hasn't really been exposed to the world too much, Twain goes through Huck's adventures in a sequential manner, going from small things to bigger things. Small things being that he raids the ship with Jim, and then moving on to bigger things like Jim being sold to Jim being sold by the Duke and Dauphin. And using these adventures, Twain is able to reveal what society's true colors are, exposing different problems in society through a humorous manner, being that it's from the eyes of a young person who probably hasn't seen these things, and using these to expose the true flaws of society. Moving on to the first quote, it says, "Then pretty soon Sherburne sort of laughed, not the pleasant kind, but the kind that makes you feel like when you are eating bread that's got sand on it." And using this point of view, we see how a young person in this time sees the world. A humorous parallel was drawn between a laugh and an uncomfortable feeling between Huck's eyes, which creates a sense of immaturity and youth. Twain shows the audience that we can see the world in a lighter view, and rather than something more morbid, which we could most likely get from an adult or mature person, where flaws would be hidden. So, in other words, Twain uses this young person's point of view to show the world in a different manner, where flaws would probably be hidden if they were shown from an adult who would look at things different than Huck. And moving on to the second quote, it says, "It didn't take me long to make up my mind that these liars weren't no kings nor dukes at all, but just low-down humbugs and frauds. But I never said nothing, never let on. It's the best way. Then you don't have no quarrels and you don't get into no trouble." And in this section, Twain utilizes another realization that Huck achieves further along his adventures, provoking a new sense into Huck. So using this section, Twain develops the character of Huck, making him more mature and more, I guess, exposed to the world. And using that, he's easily able to expose the flaws of society, one that consists of hit criminals like the Duke and Dauphin and many other people he meets that are hidden in society.
In The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, it is primarily centered around the dynamic character Huck, who consecutively tries to get away from being civilized. Twain organizes his classic novel in a way that the events and incidents that Huck endures build up upon future events. With Huck's descriptive acts of cowering away from civilization, Twain follows the young boy to exploit societal ideals and flaws. Twain's arrangement of the plot, along with the organization of chapters themselves, provides a distinctive style that highlights his mastery of writing, deploying a base for Huck, who the story revolves around, and following with detailed sections of Huck's adventures gives the book a movie-like feeling. By building up upon Huck's adventures every time, Twain is able to organize the book to provide serious insight into societal flaws, hiding the vital analysis in his humor. In the first quote, which states, "Now the way the book winds up is this. Tom and me found the money that the robbers hid in the cave, and it made us rich. The widow Douglas, she took me up for her son, but Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up and started a band of robbers." Twain successfully introduces Huck's life in a concise manner, utilizing both the previous novel from which this novel stemmed from and performing a summary of what had happened since, providing the reader with a quick introduction to Huck, whose emotion we see vaguely. Although this may not connect directly to the novel's purpose, it surely builds up a base for Huck's character and provides Twain with the opportunity to branch off into numerous flaws from which society evades. Twain follows up on his previous best-selling novel in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Due to this concise but detailed introduction, the audience is able to better understand Huck and his uncivilized and adventurous manner. The second quote reads, "But I reckon I got to lie out for the territory ahead of the rest because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before." In The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Twain utilizes Huck to ridicule society's ideals of civilization as he continues to venture to escape society's confinement and edification. Twain sets Huck not to be preordained by those who surround him morals of civilization, in which many are transfixed on this idea, in the beginning as well as the end. Twain follows Huck's fleet from civilization. Due to his escape from social confinement and edification, Twain is able to expose the flaws within society ideals, which are present heavily throughout the book.
Tone. Twain's use of tone, tone that conducts humor and sorrow and lots of emotions, allows Twain to deeply connect with his audience and really get inside their head. He uses tone to help make it easier for the audience to both hear the message and internalize it, and also he uses tone to emphasize the points that he wants to stand out in the minds of the audience. So the first quote is the notice that I read at the beginning. I'll read it again. Notice, persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot, by ordinance of the author. So, this is an example of Twain's humorous tone, and this continues throughout the entire book. And this humor allows him to better get into the minds of the audience, because it's oftentimes a lot easier to hear criticism of yourself when it's coming in a laughing, joking manner. Like, it's easier for you to listen to the message, first of all, because you won't just shut it down, because it's funny. But it's also you're also more likely to listen to what's actually being said. So with this quote, Twain sets a humorous tone that continues throughout the entirety of the book. It's not just, limited to the introduction. And this humor, this allows them to break down the barriers that the audience has of hearing criticism about themselves, because no one likes to be criticized. But when it comes kind of jokingly and, in a humorous fashion, you're more likely to listen to it and internalize it, and it helps Twain to lodge his message more deeply rather than having it, just... So the next quote is, this happens when Huck finds out that King and Duke have been tarred and feathered, and this is his reaction. King and Duke tarred and feathered. Well, it made me sick to see it, and I was sorry for them, poor pitiful rascals. It seemed to me like I couldn't feel ever any hardness against them any more in the world. It was a dreadful thing to see. Human beings can be awful cruel to one another. So this quote shows Twain criticizing the use of harsh punishment through his somber tone, and he depicts Huck as very troubled and uses really emotional words, in particular, poor pitiful rascals, and it was a dreadful thing to see, it troubles him. And this is really in contrast to what's normally present in the novel, where it's, funny and just kind of disconnected from the things that's going on. This makes the quote stand out even more, because it's a tone shift, and that, kind of catches you by surprise, so you pay more attention, and it just helps his message, again, resonate more with the audience, and emphasize that harsh punishment is, harsh. It's a little overboard. Alright, so that's the end of our presentation, I guess. Yeah.
Bye.